Today we're looking at the Red Scare of the 1920s. Hello, welcome to the Daily Bellringer. Please don't forget to subscribe and take a look at the questions down in the description. Also, don't forget to check out dailybellringer.com where you'll find more resources that go with many of the Bellringer videos. The Red Scare refers to a period in American history in which there was a great fear of communist and anarchist influences within American society. Communism is a political theory developed in the mid-1800s by Karl Marx. Communism promotes class warfare that would lead to a society in which all property is publicly owned, or in other words, owned by the government, and resources would be equally distributed to citizens. Much of this fear was fed by the recent Bolshevik Revolution that had taken place in Russia in 1917. Vladimir Lenin led the revolution, which eliminated the Russian royal family and replaced them with the Communist Party. Americans began to refer to anyone with communist sympathies as Reds because of the red flag flown by the Russians. Anarchists are people that reject all forms of government or any authority. In the wake of World War I, there was a strong sense of patriotism within the United States, and any threat to the American way of life was seen as a serious concern. And although this first Red Scare was at its height from 1917 to 1919, its influence on American culture continued through the 1920s. Much of the controversy centered around labor unions and immigrants. Labor unions in America had existed for many decades prior to the 1920s and had been organized to protect the rights of workers. But now labor unions began to be viewed through a communist lens by many Americans. They were seen as agitators and as trying to encourage class division within America, exactly what communism advocated for. So now when labor unions would go on strike to ask for better wages or improved working conditions, it was interpreted as a threat to the United States. Newspapers began to sensationalize union activities and furthermore implicated immigrants to America in the scandal. The U.S. government began to fight back against these perceived threats. The U.S. Attorney General at the time, Alexander Mitchell Palmer, had vigorously fought against any communist or anarchist threats. In May of 1918, the Sedition Act was passed, which made it illegal to make statements that were abusive towards the United States government. You could not make statements that were negative towards the flag, U.S. Constitution, or the military, and if you were found to be spreading any of these ideas, you could face a $10,000 fine and 20 years in prison. One example of the act being enforced was in 1918. Labor leader Eugene Debs made a speech speaking out against U.S. involvement in World War I. Debs was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The Sedition Act was repealed or canceled in 1921 as it was a clear violation of First Amendment rights of freedom of speech, but the message it sent was clear. America would not tolerate any communist or anarchist threats. Throughout 1918 and 1919, labor unions began to go on strike. In September of 1919, over 300,000 steelworkers went on strike asking for better wages and an 8-hour workday. Their efforts were portrayed to be fueled by communist ideas, and the strike lost a lot of support and fed paranoia in America. Coupled with this, during the spring and summer of 1919, over 40 booby-trap mail bombs were mailed to prominent politicians and business leaders such as John D. Rockefeller and Attorney General Palmer himself. Americans saw the bombs and labor strikes as confirmation of a conspiracy to topple the U.S. government by communists and anarchists. Attorney General Palmer sprung into action along with up-and-coming FBI agent J. Edgar Hoover. They began to conduct what became known as Palmer raids. In November of 1919, they raided the Union of Russian Workers and arrested over 200 individuals. During the summer of 1920, called the Red Summer, dozens of more raids were conducted, and it is estimated that over 3,000 people were arrested and over 500 were deported or expelled from the United States. The raids targeted primarily European immigrants, which were believed to have ties to leftist political organizations. One event that came to symbolize the Red Scare was the trial of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. They were both accused of killing 2 men in Massachusetts during a robbery, and both of them were Italian immigrants. Both also had ties to radical anarchist groups. They were found guilty and sentenced to death. Many protested the verdict, arguing that they had been found guilty for their political beliefs and not for the crime itself. Both men maintained their innocence, but nonetheless, they were executed in August of 1927. The fear of communist and anarchist in America slowly calmed as the 1930s approached, but Red Scares again would rise after World War II in the late 1940s and early 1950s. So with that, hopefully you learned something, and thanks for watching.